A few things to cover this afternoon. First of all, we're going to return back to your fairness propositions and look at how you have kind of prioritised those statements. Then we're going to quickly look at kind of what makes a good goal and recommendation. Then the majority of the session is going to be you kind of returning to your groups to return to your goals and recommendations, looking across all of the goals and recommendations that you've been exploring across the homes and communities topics, and thinking about any changes that you think need to be made to them. And then at the end of the session today, we'll get a report back from each of your groups. So you get a chance to hear what everybody else has been talking about, and particularly where any groups have suggested any substantive changes that need to be made to the goals and the recommendations. And that's going to be important because between this weekend and the next weekends, you're going to be voting on whether or not to kind of accept those amendments, and also kind of voting on prioritising the different kind of goals and recommendations that you've been working on as well. So that's what we're going to be covering. So first of all, we're going to start off with the propositions on fairness that you worked on in previous weekends. So just a reminder that the Assembly question is, how should Scotland change to tackle the climate emergency in an effective and fair way? So during the course of the Assembly, you've been exploring what that kind of, kind of question of fairness looks like, and you developed a number of kind of propositions on fairness that we then, as an Assembly, prioritise. So I'm now going to go through how you across the Assembly prioritise those different statements, so you get a sense of kind of what's come out on top and what's kind of most supported across the Assembly. So the statement that these all kind of finish is, to be fair, the recommendations that we as an Assembly present to Parliament should. And you can see that down the left-hand side there, the top group are the ones that have been prioritised by over 70% of members, then those prioritised by 60 to 70% of members, and those prioritised by 50% or more of members. And then when we come on to the next slide, you'll see some that were prioritised by lower kind of percentages of the members. So first off, those that were prioritised by over 70% of the members included to take into account the needs of different communities across Scotland, recognising that there is not a one-size-fits-all solution. And secondly, to target the highest emitters, so that organisations and individuals with the highest carbon footprints have to make the biggest changes. So those were the two that had the strongest kind of support across the Assembly and were prioritised by the most people. Then the second group were to act immediately so that future generations are not unfairly burdened with the responsibility of making change. To emphasise that it is everyone's responsibility to make changes, individuals, communities, business and government. To support people to grow knowledge and understanding, to make informed decisions and help those with the least capacity to make change to play their parts. And support workers in industries where change will lead to job losses. So all of those were prioritised by between 60 and 70% of the members. Then the next group, spread resources and the cost of change equitably rather than equally, so that those who can afford the most pay the most. Be affordable to all and not disadvantage people on lower incomes. Not increase social and economic inequalities. Protects vulnerable and disadvantaged groups from impacts of climate change and measures to combat it, ensuring no one gets left behind. So those were all prioritised by 50% or more members. And then, so coming on to the next slide. So the next group were prioritised by between 20 and 50% of members, and those included to not disadvantage rural communities, prioritise measures and investments that benefit everyone for the common good, be cost effective and consider implications for the public purse, be free from self-interest and non-partisan, not have a negative impact on developing countries, help high carbon industries through the transition, involve ongoing engagement with the people most affected by change, not disadvantaged people with disabilities, and consider Scotland's impacts and the global share of carbon emissions historically and for embodied carbon. And so then finally, the last group are those that were prioritised by fewer than 20% of members. And those included ensure that businesses and industries that have benefited most in the past contribute the most, not ask too much change from people too quickly, and put the people of Scotland first. So those fairness propositions are going to be important for you just to kind of keep in mind as you're now kind of returning to looking at your goals and the recommendations across all of the different topics that we've been considering, and as well as kind of how effective they are, kind of keeping these different propositions in mind to kind of test how fair they are, and whether or not you think they need to be changed as a result. So next, we just wanted to come on to a few quick points around kind of the goals and the recommendations, particularly kind of what makes a good recommendation. So first of all, just wanted to quickly, again, kind of reiterate the distinction between the goals and the recommendations. So the goals are what you ultimately want to achieve, and then the recommendations are what you think needs to happen to achieve those goals. And so in terms of kind of what makes a good recommendation, we're giving you kind of 4 pointers here just to be thinking about as you look at your recommendations. So the first of those is that it includes one idea and doesn't include multiple proposals in one. So the Assembly is going to be kind of voting on the recommendations, and if it combines kind of multiple different ideas all in one recommendation, it's going to be difficult for people to vote on them. And there may be some parts to a recommendation that people support, but other parts that they don't. So as far as possible, just including one idea in a recommendation, so it's really clear what people are voting on and what they're being asked to decide, is the first point. Second point is around it being not too abstract, and so it being really clear what's being proposed. So as far as possible, we don't want to leave any room for recommendations to be misinterpreted, or to be interpreted in ways that the Assembly doesn't agree with. So ensuring that the recommendation isn't too abstract and isn't kind of open to misinterpretation. On the other hand, also important for the recommendations to be not too specific as well. Particularly not going into kind of levels of detail around implementation, which could be better decided by others, and particularly for kind of experts and others who may be put in charge of delivering on these recommendations. There will be some things that they are better able to judge in terms of how to do that than we are as an Assembly. So just thinking about kind of what level it's appropriate for the Assembly to make the recommendation at, and not going too much into the detail. And then the final point around accessible language. So as far as possible, trying to avoid using kind of jargon and other words that won't make the recommendations accessible to a broad audience. So those were a few quick things for you to be thinking about as you come on to the next session. So in the next session, you're all going to be returning to the goals and the recommendations that you've been working on. So you've heard a lot of new information across this weekend as well, so there may be things that you want to return to from that. You've also been doing some work already on thinking about kind of what are the most important kind of goals and recommendations to you. Also kind of thinking about what changes need to be made to goals and recommendations. And we know that some groups have already been thinking about possibilities of merging some, or creating new goals where you think there are gaps, or recasting some of the recommendations perhaps. So for the next 70 minutes or so, you're going to kind of return to your groups and continue those conversations. particularly thinking about starting off by thinking about the goals and looking across all of the goals from all of the different topics that we've been working on, particularly looking for any opportunities to kind of merge those, and also any changes that you think need to be made to any of the goals in light of kind of what you've been hearing. And then you'll be kind of moving on to looking at the recommendations, and particularly focusing in on the recommendations that are most important to you at this stage. There are a lot of recommendations there, not enough time to go through them all. So do kind of focus your interest in kind of where you think the kind of the highest priority recommendations are. And then at the end of that, we'll return as a whole group, and we'll hear from each of the groups, and particularly hear about any of those significant changes that are being proposed. So then you can vote on those between the weekends. So it's now over to the production team to set those breakout groups up. So a few bits and pieces just to quickly finish up on, and I'm afraid we'll probably run a few minutes over, but not by too much. So first of all, I want to come to Evelyn quickly to talk about the research. So Evelyn, are you able to do that?
I am, Tim. Thanks so much. Thanks everyone for letting me join your discussions and breakout rooms again this weekend. It's been really great to be part of it. This is just a reminder, the usual reminder, to complete the end of weekend research survey. So I am posting a link in the chat, and it will also be available via email. Juliet will send that out to you, and it will be available on the online hub. So it'd be great if you could just take a few minutes to complete that survey, remembering that your responses are anonymous and they're confidential. And we ask you on all aspects of the weekend. So it's a really good opportunity for you to have your views heard. Thanks very much.
Great, thanks very much, Evelyn, for that. And just to support everything that Evelyn said there, because it's really useful for us to be able to get your feedback from those surveys as well. Helps us enormously when we're designing and facilitating kind of future weekends. So please do respond to that. So final few points just to cover before we let you go for your Sunday evenings. So all of the work from this weekend, we will pull it together and we'll share it back with you between the weekends as well, so you get an opportunity to comment on it and look over it a bit more before the next weekend. We'll be particularly sending back to you all of these kind of suggested alterations and amendments and things that we've just heard from the groups, and giving you the option to say whether you're in favour or not of them. So then we can have kind of the final sets of goals and recommendations to present to the wider assembly at the next weekends. And there will also be an opportunity for you to prioritise the goals and the recommendations, so we can get a sense from across you which are the most important. We've still got a lot of goals and recommendations in there, so hopefully that will give us the opportunity to maybe kind of focus down on the things that you think are really the most important. So do look out for those, because they'll kind of be the option or opportunity for you to be able to vote on those. The other thing just to point out at this stage is these are kind of recommendations that you'll be kind of proposing to the wider assembly. So it will be up to the whole assembly to vote on everything. And so you'll also at the next weekend get to hear what the other work streams have been working on, and be able to vote on those recommendations as well. So this is kind of quite a complex process of bringing together all of the different streams, but really important to do, so you get a chance to see what everybody else has been working on as well. So the other thing just to finally mention is at the next weekends, we will all be back into one kind of whole assembly meeting. And that will also be an opportunity to look across all of the recommendations, all of the goals, and looking at where there are opportunities to bring things together again. So there might be goals and recommendations that we've come up with in this work stream that kind of speak to others from other work streams as well. And so we'll be able to kind of look across them all and do a final stage of I guess perhaps kind of bringing some of those together and looking for the crossovers. So I think that's all for this weekend. Sorry, we've kind of slightly overrun, but fantastic to have you all with us, and thank you very much for all of your hard work, and thank you to all of the team involved in supporting you as well, and looking forward to seeing you back for weekend 6. So see you in a few weeks.